I'm Kent Dobson. I really want to understand the life and times of Jesus. I want to know who he was and why he had such a huge impact on history. Join me on a journey to find out. To discover the difference between fact and fiction, I'll meet the world's greatest archaeologists, scholars, and people of faith. The old Gospels have been challenged, and new ones have been discovered. So about the life of Jesus of Nazareth, what's real and what's a myth? He's dominated 2,000 years of Western history. Millions have devoted their lives to him. Wars have been fought in his name. But who was this man, really? This is my search for the truth. I'm a biblical historian and teacher. And today, I'm on my way to Bethlehem. You see, when I was a kid, we were told the 4 Gospels of the New Testament told you everything you needed to know about Jesus. They were the gospel truth. But as I studied the ancient history of my faith, I started coming up with real questions. And for me, the mystery begins with Jesus' birth. We're now in Bethlehem, which means we've crossed into the West Bank. It's almost as if we're crossing into another country with a border and a wall and a fence. This is the reality of the Holy Land today. Bethlehem now is a bustling Palestinian city. But 2,000 years ago, it was a small town in the shadow of the Roman Empire. In 200 BC, Rome began to spread beyond Italy. It would eventually dominate the entire Mediterranean. By the time Jesus was born, the empire was starting to control the ancient land of Israel. Imagine the nativity story. Jesus in a manger, Mary and Joseph, the wise men, Herod. It's all meant to have happened right here. But did it? The Gospels of Matthew and Luke put Jesus' birth here in Bethlehem. According to Luke, his parents, Joseph and Mary, were forced to leave their home in Nazareth and travel down south to be registered for a tax census, because Bethlehem is where Joseph was originally from. Many of the world's top biblical scholars dispute this part of the story. Dominican priest Jerome Murphy O'Connor is one of them. Why don't you think the census happened?
We have Roman census regulations from Egypt, for example, and they all say what you'd expect. Everybody stay home.
Of course.
No
Why
around.
travel around to be counted? You can just be counted wherever you live and work.
Look at the economic disruption. I mean, it's totally impossible. And the date, you see, he says, Luke says it was conducted by Quirinius. Quirinius did conduct a census here, but much too late.
Perhaps 10 years too late. And without the census, the Holy Family has no reason to even be in Bethlehem. Let me tell you, for someone who was raised on these stories like me, this creates a real conflict. The Church of the Nativity is built on the very spot where tradition says Jesus was born. The manger scene you see depicted every year at Christmas time is supposed to have happened right here. Now, I'm not so sure. One of the people who has seriously questioned the entire nativity story is famous biblical historian John Dominic Crossan. Do you think the nativity story is historical?
No, I do not think the nativity story in either Matthew or Luke is historical. All the details are really totally different. We combine them in our cribs, but they're totally different. Each of those I see as parable rather than history.
So you don't think they happened?
No. For example, Matthew's going to have Jesus as the new Moses, going to have Herod kill all the young children, just like Pharaoh killed all the young children in Exodus. It's a powerful parable, but it's not history.
John Dominic Crossan reminds me of the story we've all heard at least once. Wise men from the east foresee the birth of the Messiah, and they tell the evil King Herod that a true leader of the Jewish people has been born. So Herod has all the newborn male infants in Bethlehem killed. It's called the slaughter of the innocents. John Dominic doesn't think this story is historical either, but he is a person of faith. So I wonder if the tension between fact and faith is difficult for him. Is it hard to stay in that tension?
It is the tension of life as far as I'm concerned. It is. It is. I suppose I should confess that I've never found it hard. I found it exciting.
One of the characters of the Nativity story that just fascinates me is King Herod the Great. And he's definitely for real. He was the Jewish king who ruled the province of Judea when Jesus was born. It was during his reign that Judea was slowly swallowed by the Roman Empire. How do I know he was real? Because he's all over the history books. And the ruins of his buildings are all over modern Israel. I want to get to the reality behind this notorious bad guy and his relationship to Jesus. The best place to do that is called Caesarea. Caesarea is the port city Herod designed and built from scratch just before Jesus was born. It was a true masterpiece, the greatest port in the Roman Empire. It was Herod's attempt to create a mini Rome in Israel. Look at these marble columns. This one is from Turkey, this one is from Italy, this one is from Greece, and this enormous one is from Aswan in Egypt, brought all the way here by Herod the Great. Just in the stonework in Caesarea, you get a real sense for just how international and powerful he was. But was Herod really as sinister as the Bible makes him out to be? To learn more, I'm meeting up with historian Sarah Aronson.
In my opinion, you need a psychologist for Herod, not a historian. We know the facts. The facts are horrific. He killed his most beloved wife. He strangled in the pool and drowned his two sons by her. And I could go on with all his atrocities. But his other characteristics, I think, should give him a better place in history.
Give me an example.
Well, as a builder, I think he was one of the greatest. He introduced Roman features into the landscape. As a statesman, he was a king on the par of the greatest Judean kings of the last 1,000 years before him. He was really the king of the Jews.
So Herod was both monster and brilliant ruler. But the truth is, he may have never heard of anyone named Jesus, or ordered the slaughter of the innocents. But Caesarea has shown me that Herod did bring Rome to Jesus' doorstep. I don't think I realized that Rome was such a force to be reckoned with, not just in terms of their might and power from a military point of view, but they really invaded every aspect of culture, from art to beauty to commerce. It's like you couldn't get away from them. When Herod died, we can't exactly be sure where Jesus was. But before long, he would appear in a village to the north called Nazareth. What kind of world did that young boy grow up in? To find out, I'm headed there next. The biggest mystery when it comes to Jesus is his childhood. it's almost completely unknown. But Nazareth was his hometown, and it's here that new clues are beginning to emerge. Jesus' Nazareth was a small community, very small. I thought of him sort of as a middle-class kind of worker or something. But his world was very different. He was poor. According to the New Testament, Jesus was part of a large peasant family. His mother Mary had 5 sons and a number of daughters. The Gospel of Matthew also says that Jesus followed in his father Joseph's footsteps as a carpenter. But because of a bad translation of an ancient Greek word, people may have the wrong idea about that. In the Bible, Jesus is called a tekton, and most people have understood that to mean carpenter, but the word really means builder. And in this part of the world, you built with stone. Now, right in the heart of Nazareth, they found a quarry, an ancient quarry 2,000 years old. You can actually see the cuts in the stone out of which they drew the hard limestone they needed for their homes. It's very easy to imagine that Jesus came right here. Joseph and Jesus might have been stonemasons and not really carpenters at all. That would mean they did the exact same thing that I'm doing right now, maybe even in the same place. Another clue to Jesus' childhood is just 4 miles away from Nazareth. It's a Jewish city called Sepphoris, and it was under construction when Jesus was a boy. Sepphoris was a large, wealthy community built for Jewish aristocrats who cooperated with Rome. One look at Sepphoris and you could see Rome's influence. But Romans didn't build this place. Local Jewish stonemasons did. I think Jesus could have worked here, side by side with his father, Joseph. Not as a carpenter, but as a stonemason. He may have helped build Sepphoris as a boy, feeling not just the scorching sun, but the weight of Roman occupation. There's only one other trace of Jesus' early years. The Gospel of Luke tells of the day when a 12-year-old Jesus wandered away from his parents in Jerusalem, and they had to go searching for him. They finally found him in the temple, among the wise men, listening to them and asking questions. And as the Gospel of Luke tells us, everyone who heard him was astonished at his understanding and his answers. Jesus grew up among people who were very devout, surrounded by a world of powerful Jewish beliefs. A recent discovery has opened up a window on that world, and I want to know more. So I'm heading east with my good friend, archaeologist Brian Schultz. Our destination is a remote area called Qumran, near the Dead Sea. It's one of the hottest, most desolate places on Earth. In 1947, the goats of a Bedouin shepherd strayed into a remote cave high on the cliffs of Qumran. As the story goes, the man followed them in, and he was puzzled to see some old jars stacked at the back of the cave, most of them broken. Inside, he discovered bundles of ancient texts. They came to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here were 2,000-year-old documents detailing the beliefs of a Jewish sect called the Essenes. And the remains of their community at Qumran have now also been unearthed.
So I believe that's what's happening in Jerusalem. In one sense, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you could almost say was a mini revolution for understanding the world of Jesus.
Obviously, it's a lot of work to live out here in the wilderness. What's motivating them?
They believed they were living in the end of days, that the end of the world as we know it now, or as they knew it then, that was coming to an end very, very soon. And it meant basically that Israel would no longer have any foreign rulers ruling in the land. Evil's undone. God rules from Jerusalem. I think that's one of the main differences, because Jesus interacts.
Brian tells me the Essenes lived out Jewish beliefs in a radical way.
A lot of different social groups.
They were obsessed with purity and the coming apocalypse.
These people are obviously very concerned about ritual purity. Why are they so concerned about it?
One of their main texts is Isaiah 40, verse 3, and it says, "A voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord." And so they believed that they needed to come out to the wilderness and prepare the way for the Lord, and that meant being ritually pure. And the Bible tells us to be ritually pure, you needed to bathe in water.
To get what they called living water for their ritual baths, they had to capture seasonal floodwaters. So they had no choice but to devise one of the most remarkable aqueducts anywhere in the world.
Wow. So millions of gallons can come rushing through here.
Yeah. It comes almost as high as the rock there. Like, just huge, the amount of water. So here we're gonna have to do a bit of crawling to get into this tunnel. Watch your head.
Wow.
In places, the Essene engineers even had to channel water through solid rock on its way to the community's ritual baths.
I'm in the Shrine of the Book, the museum designed to house the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts really are priceless. They give us a glimpse into the first century Jewish world that Jesus emerged from.
But is this where Jesus got his ideas? Was he ever an Essene himself? To me, the evidence of the scrolls is that he was not. Most of the texts are from the Hebrew Bible, essentially the same as the Christian Old Testament. There are also detailed records of the community's rules. What they all make clear is that the Essenes were a strict and conservative Jewish sect, highly exclusive of outsiders. That fact and their apocalyptic obsessions make them seem very different from Jesus. It was a big part of his world, but somehow not him. And I still need to find out what made Jesus who he was. To dig deeper, I'm on my way to the place where he lived, taught, and delivered a message that was original and revolutionary. So I've learned that historians have real questions about the early life of Jesus.
But about one thing, they're absolutely certain. Jesus came here about the age of 30 and began to teach and heal people by the shores of the Sea of Galilee.
He doesn't really preach the apocalypse, and he's not obsessed with ritual purity. He lived in a time of fierce Roman oppression, but amazingly, his was a message of peace.
I can't help thinking about these fields and this lake. This is what Jesus saw. This is where he walked around, and this is where he talked with his disciples. It's out of this landscape that he pulls all those amazing images and all those beautiful metaphors.
Jesus made his mark on the world as a healer and a prophet. His words struck a very special chord with the people around him. And interestingly, half of all of his disciples were fishermen. The Gospel according to Matthew says, "As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting their net into the sea. They were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, 'Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.'" I've often wondered about this connection. We know that he understood the lives of simple people. He had grown up among them, construction workers and farmers. But why did he spend most of his adult life with fishermen?
Surprisingly, fishing hasn't changed that much in 2,000 years. They still fish with nets on the Sea of Galilee. This is pretty cool. Jesus said the kingdom of God is like a net, which is let down into the water. And when it's pulled up again, it's full of all kinds of fish. Then you separate the good fish from the bad fish. Jesus was a great teacher, no doubt, and part of the reason he was so great is he just used simple, everyday images that anyone could understand. It didn't matter if you were rich or you were poor.
Historical research has now given us a deeper understanding of the fishing connection in Jesus' story. Just before Jesus started preaching in 24 AD, a new taxation system was introduced. It increased taxes on fishermen. They were being forced into destitution. Perhaps it was this that made them so receptive to Jesus' message of hope and another way. A recent find has given us even more insight. Moshe Lufan and his brother Yuval have been fishermen on the Sea of Galilee all their lives. In January 1986, there was a drought, and the level of the sea fell, revealing something that had been hidden for centuries.
Tell me about the day that you found the boat.
Before, my brother Moshe and I, we are born here in the water. My father is a fisherman, and we are second generation from fishermen. And all the time we are a child, we are playing the Sea of Galilee. And one day we see nail.
A nail.
Nail. A nail is a Roman nail. And after 20 centimeters, another one. We are clean the place, we see the wood, said, wow, we find boat.
You knew right away that it was a boat?
Yes, we are jumping, we are dancing, remember? But after sun go outside, is big rainbow.
So a big rainbow appeared when you were looking at the boat?
Yes, and we are feeling this boat is something special.
The special boat that Yuval found was from the early 1st century, Jesus' time. And until its discovery, nobody really knew what one of the apostles' fishing boats would have looked like.
From the sea, it was sort of just...
Maritime archaeologist Shelley Waxman was in charge of the excavation.
This boat was found on the outskirts of Migdal, home of Mary Magdalena, Mary from Migdal.
How many people in a boat like this?
Josephus Flavius, who's a 1st century AD Jewish historian, talks about boats of this type, and he refers several times to 15 people being able to get in the boat. Now remember that people were smaller in those days. Average height of a Jewish male, Galilean male in the 1st century AD was around 5 foot 4.5 inches.
So it is possible to imagine Jesus and the 12?
If he wanted to sail with the 12 apostles, he could have.
Isotope dating has shown that the boat was built around the time of Jesus' birth. So it probably was sailing the lake during his lifetime.
So who do you imagine used this boat?
I think Jesus walked with this boat because she give peace all the area.
Wow.
This is what I see.
I guess you never know.
I don't know. I not say.
But just how peaceful was Jesus' message, really?
It's easy to imagine Jesus during his teaching years here in Galilee with sort of nice pastoral scenes like fishing out in the boat with the disciples or eating in people's homes. But it's very important to remember that this was a place of intense political feelings. And Jesus was talking about an alternative kingdom. Revolt was in the air, rebellion was in the air, and Jesus was a part of it.
Jerusalem. I don't know any other city like it. As beautiful or as torn apart by centuries of religious and political conflict.
I'm sitting on the Mount of Olives, and this is where, according to the Gospels, Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. But the city he would have seen looked very different than what I'm seeing today.
His Jerusalem was a Jerusalem before Christianity, before Islam. It was massive for the standards of the time, home to about 100,000 people. At the center of the city was the symbolic heart of all Judaism, the Great Temple, the holiest of holies. The Romans sacked Jerusalem and destroyed the temple in the year 70 AD, just 40 years after Jesus' death. Today, all that's left is the outer enclosure, often called the Western or Wailing Wall. The faithful come here to remember, to pray. It is one of the holiest places on earth. The temple Jesus prayed in may have been destroyed, but nearby are ancient parts of the city he knew. Streets, markets, homes. Jerusalem is Jesus' final destination. It's where he decides to take one singular action that is irreversible.
Something happened close by here that really sealed Jesus' fate. I'm on my way to see one of the foremost biblical scholars of our time, John Dominic Crossan. I'm hoping he can tell me more about that day.
The day Jesus enters the great temple for the last time.
Why does Jesus get in trouble in the temple in the first place?
Because he goes there to make trouble by making a demonstration against high priestly collaboration with Roman power.
It was intentional then.
It was quite intentional. And he did it at the most volatile time of the year, Passover.
The New Testament says, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers."
So Jesus comes into the temple and turns over the tables. Why is he doing this?
The temple is the house of God, but right now it's run by the high priestly authorities who have to, whether they like it or not, collaborate with the Roman imperial authority. Rome happened to be the ruling empire at the time of Jesus, and Jesus is absolutely in his own Jewish tradition. He announces, this is not the way God wants the world run. That is subversion.
So you think Jesus' message was subversive down to the core in terms of empire?
It was radically subversive, and it was in the long tradition of Jewish Torah, Jewish prophets, which from the time of the Egyptians and the Exodus had insisted that basically God is against empire because it's unjust.
I guess I had never really understood what powerful political statements Jesus was making. In the Christianity I know, his political context had disappeared.
I think most people like to imagine Jesus in a clean white robe with a little blue sash and some long flowing hair. Those are certainly the images that I grew up with. But to see Jesus as a revolutionary and as one who fights for the poor, I think is deeply challenging, and it challenges my own understanding of who he is and who he was.
He must have known the risks that he was running. He'd seen what happened to lots of other Jewish leaders before him. To openly call down judgment on Jerusalem was to take a road that only led one place. A few days after Jesus called down judgment on the high priests in the temple, they called down the judgment of Rome on him. He was arrested, handed over to the Romans, and sentenced to death.
Whether you're a believer or not, you have to agree that Jesus' crucifixion shaped history. I'm on my way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where most people think he died.
It's supposed to have been built on what was known as Golgotha, the place of the skull, the site of the crucifixion. Today, it's a church, and it's where I've arranged to meet John Dominic Crossan one last time.
Dominic, hi.
How are you, Ken?
Fancy meeting you. Should we go in and have a look at the church?
Yeah, exactly.
For 17 centuries, pilgrims have been coming here in search of some contact with the life of the man they worship as their savior. Just inside the door, they wipe rose water on the stone where his body is said to have lain. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the most amazing places I've ever seen. And it has me thinking about the last day of Jesus' life.
Why did the Romans choose crucifixion?
Because crucifixion was like the Romans hanging up a poster. They wanted it as a public warning, state terrorism. Look at this. Don't do what this person did.
So they could have killed him in any way, but this was a public...
Yes, and that's very important. They could have garroted him in the barracks, but this is a public statement.
So the Romans dealt with Jesus the way they dealt with all agitators against imperial rule. The question that fascinates me is, why wasn't that the end of the story? Why did Jesus' followers cling to his memory so passionately?
Take us back to the weeks and months following the death of Jesus. How did this community survive?
Well, the major issue was that Jesus himself had told them before his death that everything didn't depend on him, that the whole kingdom of God was not a monopoly.
They were a part of it.
They were a part of it. They were already empowered into it. And so, slowly but surely, and over some decades of oral tradition, they began to write. And the crucial decision, of course, is to write, because the writings last.
Members of this breakaway Jewish cult were now being called Christians, and their communities were springing up throughout the Roman Empire. They spread so far and so quickly that to this day, new insights about Jesus turn up in some very unexpected places.
I'm on my way to a place called Nag Hammadi in southern Egypt. It's a place very few outsiders ever visit. But it's the site of an archaeological discovery that has seriously questioned what we know about Jesus, and I want to see it for myself.
I'm here with one of the world authorities on the discovery,
So, Kent, what do you think?
Dr. Marvin Meyer. He tells me that in 1945, two brothers were digging for fertilizer along the cliff face when they came across something very unusual. It was an enormous jar buried in the sand.
Most likely, it was right around here, somewhere.
Inside, they found something incredible. Lost Gospels about the life of Jesus. Some just as old as the ones in the New Testament. Today, they're known as the Gnostic Gospels. They had been copied and buried centuries ago by the monks of a nearby monastery called St. Pachomius. Those monks had been ordered to destroy the Gnostic Gospels for being heretical, but instead they hid them.
Help us imagine what it must have been like for those monks to come here and put those scrolls into a jar and bury them.
But the fact of the matter is, if they had been reading those texts as being inspiring texts, it's going to be very hard to burn them or throw them into the river.
So they want them to be preserved in some way.
And so they've got to get rid of them. The problem is, how do you get rid of a text, but you love the text?
Right.
You don't want to destroy it.
You seal it in a jar.
The brothers didn't really know how important their discovery was, and so it was years before they made their way to scholars who could translate them.
And when you find a text and translate it, it allows that person's voice to speak again. Somebody who had an understanding of Jesus and wrote a text is allowed to speak again, and there's no moment that is more exciting than that.
There are caves all over this cliff, and you can tell monks spent time inside. I I actually find one that's covered with their ancient script. It's the same writing found in the Gnostic Gospels, Coptic, a form of ancient Egyptian, written with the Greek alphabet.
These are psalms. So monks came up here and they just would inscribe the very beginning of the psalm to get them going on the liturgy because they had it memorized. They're just beautiful, all in red natural paint. Amazing.
The cave writings take me back to the time of the Gnostic Gospels and those first centuries after the crucifixion. The time when the early Christians were trying to decide for themselves who Jesus really was. But now, I need to find out what made the Gnostic Gospels so dangerous. Why did they end up in the sand instead of in the Bible? This is the final leg of my journey. At the Coptic Museum in Cairo, in a restricted area, are the actual Gnostic Gospels. I'm here to find out what's in them that got them buried. Archaeologist Marvin Meyer has spent years translating the texts.
Hey, Marv.
Hey, Kent, how are you?
Doing well.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
Welcome to the Coptic Museum.
Thank you. So here they are.
These are the texts, the Nag Hammadi texts themselves.
They're beautiful.
They are lovely, aren't they? That papyrus is preserved very well. The ink is clear. It's just marvelous to see the real thing.
What really interests me here is what made these texts dangerous? How'd they end up in the sand?
Well, these texts represent a different kind of Christianity and a different kind of piety in general than what was accepted by most of the church fathers and the leaders of religion. These texts, in large part, are texts of gnosis. That is to say, they're texts of knowledge that emphasize knowledge as opposed to faith.
The New Testament has 4 Gospels. Here are over a dozen more. The text that is so controversial here is the Gospel of Thomas. Why? Because it challenges the core belief of Christianity. It seems to doubt the divinity of Jesus. It says, "The kingdom is inside you. When you come to know yourselves, you will see that it is you who are the children of the living Father."
The overall picture of Jesus that is found in the Gospel of Thomas is that Jesus is a teacher of wisdom, a Jewish sage, if you will. Jesus does not perform any physical miracles. He doesn't predict the end of the world. Quite the opposite. He disagrees with that kind of approach. He doesn't die for anybody's sins.
Does he die on the cross, though?
There is no reference to his death whatsoever.
In Thomas,
in
nothing.
the Gospel of
It's
Thomas.
just-
And he doesn't rise from the dead on the 3rd day.
So do you think, they're sharing?
Maybe. This is why they called him Doubting Thomas. His gospel doesn't insist that Jesus is the only Son of God. Now that these documents are out in the open, they can't be ignored. But what about their impact? What do they do to faith? There's one more place I want to see. Deep in the eastern desert of Egypt is an order of Christian monks who have practiced a monastic lifestyle since the 4th century. It's called St. Anthony's. St. Anthony's was created by the very founder of Christian monasticism in 356 AD, about the same time that the Gnostic Gospels were being declared heretical. Monks have fasted, prayed, and lived here ever since. I'm hoping this remote place can teach me about how the faithful then and now interpret the Gnostic Gospels.
Father Maximus. I'm Kent. Nice to meet you. This is a beautiful place.
Oh, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Father Maximus has been a monk at St. Anthony's for over 30 years. I'm blown away by his lifestyle. It's almost no different from the way monks in the Egyptian desert lived over 1,000 years ago.
Do you feel closer to God out in the desert?
Sure, for sure.
Yeah. But this is a hard life, though.
It is a hard life, but it's a beautiful, enjoyable life. I mean, you can feel it when you are living at the monk here, how the early fathers translated the Bible to living life.
So we'll take our shoes off? Yes, we have to take our shoes here. This is the
Father Maximus takes me to the monastery's chapel, one of the oldest in the world.
Oh, wow.
This is amazing. All these paintings.
This is the Church of St. Anthony, which it was built in the 4th century.
So the 4th century.
The building, the structures from 4th century.
Okay.
The chapel is covered with ancient Coptic frescoes. Some of them painted at the same time that the monks in Nag Hammadi were copying the Gnostic Gospels. I have to know how these new Gospels affect a man of Orthodox faith like Maximus.
Do you think these finds tell us anything about Jesus?
Yeah, they said something about Jesus, but in the wrong way.
In the wrong way?
They told you, they said that Jesus Christ was not crucified. I mean, it's amazing because how they took some symbols from the Bible and then they mixed it with the pagan mythology. I mean, they are trying to combine both together, which is not true. Which means we can say they are not Christians. We excommunicated all this Gnostic movement from the church, and we said, oh, this is not a Christian movement. This is completely something different.
Is there anything about John the Baptist?
Father Maximus has no doubt. The Gnostic Gospels are heresy, and Christianity is better off without them. For me, it's not that easy to dismiss them. The Gnostic Gospels seem more important than that. They're a reminder that from the very beginning, there were different types of Christianity and different versions of Jesus. I set out in search of Jesus the man. But where have I arrived? I think I've discovered that the harder you look for him, the more the questions keep piling up.
I feel a lot of connection with this Thomas character who ends up getting called the Doubting Thomas. He doubted Jesus' resurrection, and I bring my own questions and doubts to the Bible and to the story of Jesus. But he was a disciple, he remained a disciple, and I think that's just part of being an honest person, really trying to wrestle with some of this stuff. And I don't think even Jesus wants someone like me to stop asking questions. I think if there is a path to following Jesus, it has to be an honest one. And that's just something that I'm willing to live with.
Will we ever know exactly who Jesus the man was? I don't think so. Like so many things about this builder from Galilee, that will always be a mystery.